The saddest thing Ethan Walker ever saw wasn't hunger. It was someone trying to sell a memory just to survive. Acid rain tapped softly against the metal canopy above Market Row 7, turning the neon lights into trembling streaks of blue and gold across the puddles below. Cargo haulers groaned as they rolled through the crowded spaceport district, their anti-grav engines humming beneath the steady murmur of merchants, travelers, and workers rushing to finish another long day. The air smelled of machine oil, wet steel, and synthetic fuel. It was the smell of survival. It was the smell Ethan had known for nearly 15 years. The human mechanic wiped grease from his hands with a worn shop rag as he stepped out of Walker Repair and Fabrication. His back ached from 12 straight hours rebuilding a damaged freight engine. The sign above his garage flickered weakly, struggling against the rain just like everything else in this forgotten corner of the galaxy. He glanced toward the food vendors lining the opposite side of the street. Maybe he'd grab dinner before heading home. That was when he noticed the crowd. It wasn't large. Just enough people gathered beneath a bright white storefront to make Ethan curious. Most passed by without stopping. A few watched for a moment before continuing on their way. Nobody looked shocked. Nobody looked upset. Whatever was happening, it was apparently normal. Ethan crossed the street anyway. Years of fixing broken machines had taught him something important. Most people ignored problems until they became impossible to repair. As he approached, the glowing sign above the shop came into focus. Biofiber Exchange. Beneath it stood a young, alien woman. She couldn't have been more than 20, maybe younger. Her silver hair flowed nearly to her waist, shimmering beneath the neon lights like liquid starlight. Rainwater clung to the strands, making them sparkle against her pale blue skin. She sat quietly in a metal chair while an elderly merchant adjusted a scanning device around her head. Ethan slowed. Something about the scene felt wrong. Not dangerous. Not dramatic. Just wrong. The girl kept both hands folded tightly in her lap. Her fingers trembled slightly despite her effort to stay still. A portable display beside the merchant flashed numbers across the screen. Estimated fiber yield. Purity rating. Credit value. Ethan frowned. He knew what the shop bought. Hair from certain species could be processed into expensive biomedical materials. It was legal. Common, even. Most people who sold it did so for extra income. Yet the expression on the young woman's face didn't look like someone making a business decision. It looked like someone saying goodbye. The merchant picked up a set of cutting tools and checked the display again. The valuation is acceptable, he said. You understand that once the process begins, there are no refunds. The girl nodded slowly. Her eyes never left the floor. I understand. Her voice was barely louder than the rain. The merchant adjusted the chair. We'll need most of the length. For the first time, something flickered across her face. Not fear. Not anger. Grief. Small. Quiet. Almost invisible. Yet Ethan saw it. The girl swallowed and reached up carefully, running her fingers through the silver strands one final time. Then she whispered something so softly that almost nobody heard it. Almost nobody except Ethan. Please don't cut it too short. The words hung in the damp air. The merchant paused briefly before returning to his equipment. But Ethan remained frozen where he stood, because suddenly he wasn't looking at hair anymore. He was looking at something far more valuable. And for reasons he couldn't yet explain, he knew this story wasn't really about money. The merchant reached for the first silver strand, but a new voice interrupted him before the cutting tool could touch it. How much? Ethan asked. The elderly merchant looked up, mildly annoyed. Excuse me. Rain drummed softly against the canopy overhead. Neon reflections rippled across the wet pavement between them. Ethan stepped closer and glanced at the display screen. The valuation number glowed in pale blue letters. It was not a fortune. It was not even enough to cover a month of rent in the district. How much are you paying her? Ethan repeated. The merchant folded his arms. That is private. Business. Not anymore. The young woman finally looked up. Her violet eyes met Ethan's for the first time. They were tired eyes. Not old. Just exhausted. The kind of eyes that had spent too many nights worrying about tomorrow. Ethan had seen that look before. Usually in the mirror during the first years after opening his garage. Sir, she said quietly. It is all right. Ethan shook his head. No, it really is not. The merchant sighed dramatically and tapped the screen. The transaction value is displayed. She agreed to the terms. Ethan stared at the number for several seconds. Then he looked back at the girl. That is what your hair is worth. Her fingers tightened around the silver braid resting across her shoulder. She hesitated before answering. It is what someone is willing to pay. Something about the answer bothered him more than it should have. Maybe because it sounded rehearsed. Maybe because it sounded like something a person told themselves after running out of better options. Around them, the crowd had already begun losing interest. Spaceports were full of difficult stories. Most people learn not to stop for every one of them. Ethan reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn credit chip. The merchant's eyes brightened immediately. If you wish to purchase the fiber rights. No. Ethan placed the chip back in his pocket. I want to know why. The girl blinked. Why what? Why you were sitting here? For a moment, she seemed caught off guard by the question. The merchant certainly was. Nobody asked why. They asked how much. They asked how long. They asked whether the material quality justified the price. But not why. The rain continued falling in steady sheets beyond the canopy. Cargo transports drifted overhead through the gray evening sky. Somewhere in the distance, a ship horn echoed through the port. The girl lowered her eyes again. Because I need credits. For food? Ethan asked. She nodded once. Then she hesitated. And medicine? Ethan noticed the pause. For you? This time she shook her head. My brother. The answer arrived so quietly he nearly missed it. A strange silence settled over the small storefront. Even the merchant seemed less interested in the transaction now. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. How old is he? 8. She swallowed hard. His treatment shipment arrived this morning. I have until tomorrow to pay for it. Ethan looked at the glowing number on the display again. Then at the braid of silver hair she was preparing to lose forever. None of it added up. Not emotionally. Not practically. Not humanly. Or alienly, for that matter. The girl reached up and gently touched the end of her braid. My mother used to brush it every night, she said, almost to herself. She said our family's history lived in our hair. Ethan felt something tighten inside his chest. Because suddenly the credits did not matter. The medicine did not matter. The transaction did not matter. What mattered was the way she held that braid like the last remaining piece of someone she loved. And for the first time since he walked across the street, Ethan understood exactly what he was looking at. This was not a sale. It was a sacrifice. For several long seconds, neither of them spoke. The merchant shifted uncomfortably behind the counter and glanced toward the growing line of customers waiting farther down the walkway. Business was slowing. Rain continued whispering against the canopy overhead. Somewhere beyond the crowded market, a freighter lifted off, its engines sending a distant vibration through the wet pavement. Ethan looked at the silver braid resting across the young woman's shoulder. Then he looked at her face. What is your name? He asked. She seemed surprised by the question. Lyra. I am Ethan. She nodded politely. I know. Everyone knows the mechanic with the broken sign. Ethan glanced toward his garage across the street. One corner of the sign flickered weakly before going dark again. Despite himself, he laughed. Fair enough. For the first time, the faintest hint of a smile appeared on Lyra's face. It vanished almost immediately, but Ethan noticed it anyway. The merchant cleared his throat. If we are finished discussing life stories, I do have other customers. Ethan ignored him. How much is the medicine? Lyra looked away. More than I have. That is not what I asked. Her shoulders lowered slightly. Defeated. Tired. 800 credits. Ethan blinked. The number was larger than he expected, but not impossible. Not compared to what she was giving up. And this? He pointed toward the display. This only covers part of it. Lyra nodded. I sold everything else last month. The words landed heavily between them. Ethan studied her worn jacket. The frayed cuffs. The repaired seams. The shoes that looked at least 2 sizes too old. Now he understood why. Nothing she owned was new because nothing she owned had survived. What about family? Ethan asked quietly. Lyra's fingers tightened around the braid again. Just my brother and me. Parents. Her silence answered before her voice did. Gone. Ethan slowly exhaled. Around them, the market continued moving. Hundreds of people. Hundreds of stories. Most would never intersect. Most would never matter beyond a single day. Yet somehow this one had stopped him in his tracks. The merchant tapped the counter impatiently. If she cannot proceed, I will need to close the transaction request. Lyra straightened in the chair. Her expression hardened with determination. Ethan recognized it immediately. It was the face people made when they had already made peace with a painful choice. It is fine, she said. I can do this. The merchant reached for the cutting tool again. Ethan watched her hand drift protectively over the silver braid. Not because she was changing her mind. Because she was preparing herself to let go. That small gesture decided everything. No, Ethan said. Both of them looked at him. He reached into his jacket and removed the credit chip once more. This time he placed it directly on the counter. The merchant's eyes widened. "That covers the medicine," Ethan said. Lyra immediately stood. "No," the answer came faster than anything she had said all evening. "No, I cannot accept that." Ethan was not surprised. Pride was easy to recognize. He had spent most of his life wrestling with his own. "Good," he said. Lyra blinked. "What? I was hoping you would say that." Confusion replaced her resistance. Ethan pointed toward the garage across the street. Rain streaked down the old windows. Half the lights inside were out. "I need help." Lyra followed his gaze. "With what?" Ethan smiled slightly. "Keeping that place alive." The merchant looked disappointed. Lyra looked suspicious. "You are offering me a job?" "I am offering you a chance to earn the credits yourself." She stared at him for several seconds. "You do not even know me." Ethan shrugged. "Maybe not. But I know what hard work looks like." Across the street, another section of his failing sign flickered back to life for a few brief seconds before fading again. Ethan pointed at it. "And honestly, anyone who can survive this long is probably more qualified than half the people I have hired." This time the smile that appeared on Lyra's face stayed a little longer. Small, careful, uncertain, but real. And for the first time that evening, Ethan had the feeling that the story, standing in front of him, might not be ending after all. The rain had eased to a thin mist by the time they crossed the street. Water dripped from the edge of the garage roof and splashed onto stacks of old engine casings near the entrance. Lyra stopped just outside the open bay door and stared inside. The workshop looked larger than it had from across the road. Rows of tools lined the walls. Diagnostic screens flickered above cluttered workbenches. Half-disassembled engines occupied nearly every available surface. The air smelled of warm metal, lubricant, and electrical ozone. It was messy, loud, imperfect. Somehow it also felt alive. Ethan walked ahead and tossed his shop rag onto a nearby bench. "Welcome to the least impressive repair facility on the station." Lyra glanced around carefully. "It looks busy." Busy and successful are not always the same thing. Ethan activated the overhead lights. Several immediately flickered. One refused to turn on at all. "See?" Lyra could not help smiling again. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, she found herself standing somewhere that did not feel temporary. Somewhere that was not a waiting room, a pharmacy, or a landlord's office. Somewhere that did not remind her of unpaid bills. Ethan opened a storage locker and pulled out a portable scanner. "Before we discuss work, there is something we should take care of." Lyra's expression immediately became cautious. "What?" Ethan handed her the scanner. "Read the employment agreement." She blinked. That is it. That is it. No hidden conditions? No repayment schedule? No ownership clauses?" Ethan stared at her for several seconds. "Lyra, what kind of people have you been dealing with?" She looked away. The answer was obvious enough. Ethan sighed. The station really is getting worse. He moved toward a terminal and transferred several hundred credits from his account. The screen chimed softly. Lyra's eyes widened. "What did you just do?" "Advance payment." "I have not done any work yet." "Correct. Then I cannot accept it." Ethan leaned against a workbench. "You can. Because I am not paying for work you already did." He nodded toward the credit notification. "I am paying for work you are about to do." Lyra stared at the amount displayed on the screen. It was enough to purchase the medicine. Enough to solve tomorrow's problem. Her throat tightened unexpectedly. "You trust me that much?" Ethan shook his head. No, the answer startled her. Then he smiled. "But I trust the person who refused free money 5 minutes ago." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The workshop hummed softly around them. Cooling fans rotated overhead. Somewhere in the back room, an aging compressor rattled like it might fall apart at any second. Lyra looked down at the braid resting against her shoulder. The silver strands were still there, still untouched. She reached up and gently held them between her fingers. A simple movement. Yet it felt different now. Earlier that evening, she had been preparing to lose them. Now she was thinking about tomorrow. The thought almost felt unfamiliar. Ethan broke the silence. "Go get the medicine." "What?" "Your brother needs it." "But the garage will still be here in the morning." He pointed toward the exit. "Trust me, none of these engines are going anywhere." Lyra laughed softly. The sound surprised both of them. It was the first genuine laugh Ethan had heard from her. He realized then how young she actually was. Not a desperate customer. Not a burden. Just a young woman carrying far more responsibility than anyone should. As she turned toward the door, her gaze landed on an old framed photograph sitting beside the terminal. A younger Ethan stood beside a woman with dark hair. Both were smiling while holding a freshly completed engine component. The frame was worn from years of handling. Lyra paused. Who is she? Ethan's smile faded slightly, though not from sadness alone. Someone who used to remind me that people matter more than machines. Lyra nodded quietly. Then she stepped back into the misty evening, carrying something she had not possessed when the day began. Not money. Not security. Something rarer. A reason to believe that tomorrow might actually be different. The next morning began with the sound of rainwater dripping from ventilation pipes and the distant rumble of cargo freighters arriving at the station. Ethan unlocked the garage before sunrise, balancing a cup of black coffee in one hand while searching his pockets for the access card. The overhead lights flickered awake one by one, revealing the same cluttered workshop he had left the night before. Half-finished repairs occupied every corner. Tool cases sat open on workbenches. A diagnostic drone rested upside down beside an engine housing waiting for parts that were already 3 weeks late. Everything looked exactly the same, at least for the first 10 seconds. Then he noticed the front office light was already on. Ethan stopped. Through the glass partition, he saw a familiar silver braid hanging over the back of a chair. He checked the time on his wrist display. 6:15 in the morning. You have got to be kidding me, he muttered. Pushing open the office door, he found Lyra sitting behind an outdated terminal surrounded by stacks of invoices, maintenance records, and customer requests. The desk looked like it had been hit by a paperwork storm. Somehow she had organized everything into neat digital folders overnight. Good morning, she said without looking up. Your accounting system is terrible. Ethan laughed. Good morning to you too. She finally looked up. There were dark circles beneath her eyes, but they seemed lighter than before. Less burdened. Did your brother get the medicine? Ethan asked. The expression on her face softened immediately. Yes. Just one word. Yet it carried relief, gratitude, and exhaustion all at once. Ethan nodded. That was all he needed to hear. Lyra turned the screen toward him. You have 27 unpaid invoices. That sounds about right. 7 of those customers owe more than 6 months of storage fees. Also sounds right. 3 repair orders were completed but never billed. Ethan blinked. Seriously? Seriously. She pointed at another section. And according to this system, you lost money on 4 separate contracts because you forgot to include labor costs. Ethan stared at the screen in disbelief. I knew I liked fixing engines more than paperwork. That is becoming obvious. The corner of her mouth twitched upward. Ethan watched her for a moment. Yesterday, she had looked like someone standing at the edge of a cliff. Today, she looked focused, busy, present. It was a subtle difference, but an important one. The garage door suddenly rattled open. A maintenance hauler rolled inside, carrying a damaged atmospheric compressor nearly 10 feet long. The machine hissed loudly as overheated coolant escaped through a cracked valve assembly. Ethan immediately moved toward it. Work calls. To his surprise, Lyra stood and followed him. The compressor occupied the center service bay within minutes. Diagnostic displays lit up around the machine, while Ethan removed an inspection panel. You have mechanical experience? He asked. Not officially. That sounds like a dangerous answer. Lyra folded her arms. My mother repaired things. Ethan noticed the way her fingers briefly touched the silver braid resting over her shoulder. The same unconscious gesture from yesterday. Did she teach you? He asked. A little. Ethan handed her a portable scanner. Then let us find out how much a little is. Lyra accepted it carefully. The scanner projected streams of technical data across the compressor housing. Pressure readings, energy flow rates, thermal output curves. Her eyes moved across the information. Once, twice. Then she frowned. Something is wrong. Ethan smiled. That is why it is here. No, she stepped closer. Not the obvious damage. Her gaze narrowed. Something else. Ethan looked at the readings again. He saw nothing unusual, yet something in her voice made him pause. Because for the first time since meeting her, Lyra did not sound uncertain. She sounded like someone recognizing an old familiar language. And as the compressor hummed beneath the workshop lights, neither of them realized they were standing in front of the first clue that would change everything. The compressor remained open on the service platform for nearly an hour while Ethan checked every major component. He verified the coolant regulators, examined the damaged valve assembly, and ran 3 separate diagnostic scans through the central processor. Each result returned exactly what he expected. A worn pressure manifold, a cracked thermal seal, expensive repairs, but nothing unusual. Lyra stood beside the machine, studying the floating data streams projected from her scanner. The workshop lights reflected across the silver strands of her braid as she silently reviewed the numbers again and again. Ethan finally lowered his wrench onto the workbench. "All right," he said. "What are you seeing that I am not?" Lyra hesitated. "I am not sure. That usually means you are onto something." She moved closer to the compressor and enlarged one section of the schematic. Hundreds of glowing lines appeared above the housing like a three-dimensional map. "Look here." Ethan stepped beside her. "The energy distribution pathway?" "Yes." "What about it?" Lyra frowned. "It is inefficient." Ethan laughed. "That describes half the machines on this station." "No, I mean intentionally inefficient." That caught his attention. She highlighted a series of junction points buried deep within the architecture. "The system keeps redirecting power through unnecessary loops." Ethan stared at the display. The rerouting seemed minor. A fraction of a percent at each junction, barely noticeable individually. Yet when combined across the entire machine, the losses became significant. "Why would someone design it this way?" he asked. Lyra's expression grew. "Distant. I have seen this before." The words seemed to surprise her as much as they surprised him. Ethan folded his arms. "Where?" She remained silent for several seconds. Around them, the garage continued its normal rhythm. Air compressors hissed. Cooling fans hummed. Rain tapped softly against the roof panels overhead. Finally, Lyra answered. "At home." Ethan blinked. "You worked on systems like this?" "Not exactly." Her fingers moved across the projection, tracing several hidden pathways. "My mother used to sketch designs at night." Ethan remembered the way she had spoken about her mother before. The braid, the memories, the loss. She was an engineer? Lyra nodded. "A very good one." Something changed in her voice. Pride. Not the pride of achievement. The pride of remembering someone important. "When I was little, she used to leave diagrams scattered across the apartment. I did not understand most of them." A faint smile appeared. "I used to draw stars on the margins and get in trouble." Ethan chuckled. "Sounds dangerous." According to her, very dangerous. For a moment, the sadness usually hiding behind her eyes seemed lighter. Then she focused on the schematic again. "But I remember this pattern." Ethan leaned closer. "You are certain?" "Almost." She enlarged another section. The loops formed a repeating structure. Elegant, deliberate, familiar. Something about it bothered him too now. Not because it looked wrong, because it looked purposeful, like a signature hidden inside the machine. "Can you fix it?" Ethan asked. Lyra hesitated. "Maybe. Maybe is better than what I have." He handed her a diagnostic tablet. "Show me." For the next hour, they worked side by side. Lyra carefully adjusted power routing values, while Ethan monitored system stability. The compressor responded immediately. Energy efficiency climbed. Thermal output dropped. Internal stress readings improved across every subsystem. Neither of them spoke as the numbers continued improving. Eventually, Ethan stared at the final report and shook his head in disbelief. 22% gain. Lyra looked equally surprised. That should not be possible. And yet here we are. Ethan leaned back. Against the workbench. You realize most technicians would charge a fortune for that kind of optimization. Lyra glanced down at the data. Her expression slowly shifted from surprise to confusion. Because among the updated diagnostics, another identifier had appeared. A nearly invisible engineering marker buried deep inside the original architecture. One she had not noticed before. Her breath caught. She recognized it instantly. Not because she had studied it. Because she had seen it hundreds of times growing up. Printed on old notebooks. Scribbled across technical sketches. Hidden inside birthday cards. It was her mother's personal design signature. Lyra stared at the tiny symbol glowing in the corner of the diagnostic display. The workshop seemed to fade around her. The humming machinery. The dripping rain outside. Even Ethan's voice became distant. She knew that mark. Not because it appeared in engineering databases or corporate registries. It had never been public. Her mother used it the way artists signed paintings. A small arrangement of 3 curved lines hidden somewhere inside every design she created. Most people never noticed it. As a child, Lyra used to search for the symbol in old schematics spread across their kitchen table. Whenever she found it, her mother would smile and pretend to be surprised. "Good engineers leave clues," she used to say. "Not for strangers. For the people who know where to look." Ethan noticed the color drain from Lyra's face. "What is it?" She pointed silently at the display. He leaned closer. "A manufacturer code?" "No." Her voice sounded almost fragile. "My mother." Ethan looked back at the symbol. This belonged to her. Lyra nodded. For several seconds, neither of them moved. Then Ethan slowly pulled a chair closer. Sit down. She did not argue. The memories were arriving too quickly. The workshop lights reflected softly off the silver braid resting across her shoulder. I thought all of her work disappeared, she said quietly. After she died, the companies she worked for closed their divisions. Most of her research archives were lost. Ethan studied the diagnostic data again. Apparently not all of it. Lyra reached toward the screen with trembling fingers. The routing architecture hidden inside the compressor suddenly looked different. Not random. Not accidental. Familiar. She could almost picture her mother leaning over a drafting table late at night, adjusting the same energy pathways. The realization settled heavily in her chest. Something her mother designed was still out there. Still working. Still helping people years after she was gone. Ethan broke the silence. Do you know what this machine is? Lyra enlarged the manufacturing records attached to the compressor. Her eyes widened. No way. What? This is not a standard commercial unit. She opened additional files. Technical specifications scrolled across the display. This architecture became the foundation for several modern power management systems. Ethan blinked. You are telling me this old compressor is important? Very important. Her eyes moved rapidly across the information. Whoever built this copied pieces of my mother's work. Ethan leaned against the workbench. Then why is it sitting in my garage? Lyra opened the ownership records. The answer appeared almost immediately. Her expression changed again. Surprise followed by disbelief. Because it belongs to Helios Freight. Ethan nearly dropped his coffee mug. You are kidding. Helios Freight was one of the largest shipping corporations operating within 5 sectors. Their transport fleets carried billions of credits worth of cargo every year. They rarely used independent repair facilities. This compressor came from one of their cargo hubs. Ethan asked. Lyra nodded slowly. And according to these records, they have been struggling with efficiency losses across dozens of facilities. Ethan stared at the display, then at the compressor, then back at Lyra. The realization arrived at exactly the same moment for both of them. The optimization she had discovered was not limited to a single machine. It could potentially improve every unit built from the same architecture. Hundreds of systems. Maybe more. The workshop suddenly felt very quiet. Outside, another freighter passed overhead, its engines vibrating through the metal walls. Ethan looked toward the aging sign hanging above the garage entrance. The one that barely worked. The one he could never afford to replace. Then he looked back at Lyra. Tell me something, he said carefully. How many people know what you just found? Lyra glanced at the glowing signature one more time. Right now? A small smile appeared. Only 2. 3 days later, the garage no longer felt quite as small. The same worn walls surrounded them. The same aging lights flickered overhead. Yet something had changed. Every spare screen inside the workshop displayed data from Helios Freight. Compressor models. Energy reports. Efficiency logs. Lyra sat at the front workstation surrounded by a mountain of technical files, while Ethan balanced a wrench across one shoulder and stared at numbers that were steadily becoming more unbelievable. Run it again, he said. Lyra did. The simulation completed in less than 10 seconds. The projected efficiency gain appeared once more. 21.8%. Exactly the same as before. Ethan rubbed his forehead. I was really hoping the computer would tell us we made a mistake. The computer disagrees. I noticed. Outside, cargo traffic moved steadily through the station. Massive freighters drifted past observation windows like floating cities. Somewhere beyond the repair bay, a transport horn echoed through the rain-soaked district. Lyra leaned back in her chair. She had spent nearly 70 hours analyzing every variation of the architecture her mother helped pioneer. The deeper she looked, the more she found. Hidden optimization pathways. Elegant power routing solutions. Small improvements scattered through dozens of systems. Not revolutionary changes individually, but together they added up to something enormous. Ethan stared at the latest report. If this is correct, Helios has been losing millions of credits every year. Lyra nodded slowly, without realizing why. And your mother's design fixes it. She looked down at the signature hidden within the architecture. Not my design. Her fingers lightly touched the silver braid resting across her shoulder. Hers. Ethan was about to respond when the garage communication terminal chimed. Both of them froze. Incoming transmission. Corporate priority level. Ethan frowned. That cannot be good. The screen illuminated. A polished corporate emblem appeared first. Then a sharply dressed executive materialized in holographic form. Silver uniform. calm expression. The kind of person who managed numbers larger than most people could imagine. Walker Repair and Fabrication? The executive asked. Ethan straightened instinctively. That is us. The executive glanced at a display off-screen. My name is Nathan Cole, Director of Infrastructure Operations for Helios Freight. Ethan nearly dropped the wrench. Lyra sat perfectly still. We recently received your optimization report, Cole continued. At first we assumed it was an error. Ethan looked at Lyra. That makes two of us. To his surprise, the executive smiled. Unfortunately for our accounting department, it was not. Several additional reports appeared beside him. Charts, graphs, fleet performance projections, numbers that climbed rapidly upward. Our engineering teams independently verified your findings across 12 facilities. Cole paused. The improvements exceeded expectations. Silence filled the workshop. Even the old compressor seemed quieter somehow. So, Ethan finally asked, what happens now? The executive folded his hands. Now we would like to discuss implementation rights. Ethan blinked. Implementation rights? And compensation. That word landed much harder. Lyra lowered her gaze. She had spent months worrying about medicine costs, rent payments, grocery credits. Tomorrow. Now one conversation threatened to change everything. Nathan Cole continued speaking, but for a moment Lyra barely heard him. Her eyes settled on the silver braid hanging over her shoulder. The same braid she had nearly lost only days earlier. The same braid she had held while preparing to give away the last piece of her mother she thought remained. Yet somehow, because one stranger crossed a rainy street and asked a simple question, that story had changed. The braid remained. The memories remained. And now, against all logic, her mother's voice seemed closer than it had in years. 1 year later, sunlight streamed through the station's upper observation panels and painted long bands of gold across the workshop floor. The rain that once seemed permanent had given way to a clear morning filled with the distant hum of arriving freighters. Walker Repair and Fabrication still stood on the same corner of Market Row 7. The walls were the same. The foundation was the same. But almost everything else had changed. New service bays stretched along the expanded facility. Modern diagnostic systems glowed above spotless workstations. Cargo crews moved efficiently through loading zones, while customers waited weeks for available appointments. Above the entrance, a bright new sign shined steadily without a single flicker. Ethan stood near the open bay doors holding a cup of coffee and watching the station wake up. He still arrived before everyone else. Some habits refused to change. A familiar laugh echoed from the office. Ethan turned toward the sound. Lyra was helping a young technician review a repair schedule while simultaneously answering questions from 2 customers. Confidence had replaced uncertainty. The exhaustion that once lived behind her eyes was gone. Not because life had become perfect, because she no longer faced it alone. Her silver braid rested over one shoulder exactly as it always had. Untouched. Preserved. A reminder of a decision that never happened. Across the room, a small blue-skinned boy sat at a workbench assembling a training drone under careful supervision. Every few minutes, he looked up to make sure his sister was still nearby. Each time she smiled back. The medicine had worked. The treatments had continued. And little by little, his health had returned. Ethan watched the boy celebrate when the drone finally lifted 6 inches into the air. The smile that followed could have powered the entire station. A soft chime sounded from the office terminal. Another royalty payment from Helios Freight had arrived. Not the first. Probably not the last. The optimization system, based on Lyra's mother's forgotten architecture, now operated across hundreds of facilities. Engineering journals discussed the breakthrough regularly. Companies licensed the technology. Universities studied it. Yet the detail that mattered most to Lyra could not be measured by credits or contracts. Her mother's name was no longer forgotten. A framed photograph now hung on the far wall of the workshop. Beneath it sat a polished plaque bearing a simple inscription. Innovation leaves traces. Kindness helps people find them. Late that afternoon, after the customers left and the tools were finally silent, Lyra stood alone beside the photograph. Warm light from the setting sun reflected across the glass. She reached up and gently touched the end of her braid. The same gesture she had made countless times before. But this time the feeling was different. There was no fear attached to it. No desperation. No need to sacrifice anything. Behind her, Ethan switched off the last diagnostic display and prepared to close the garage. Ready to head home? He asked. Lyra looked at the photograph one final time before nodding. Yes. They walked toward the exit together. Outside, ships crossed the evening sky like moving stars. The station lights slowly awakened one by one. Before stepping through the door, Lyra glanced back at the workshop, at the machines, at the photograph, at the life that almost never happened. Then she smiled. Because sometimes the most important thing a person can save is not a business, a fortune, or even a future. Sometimes it is a single piece of hope. And sometimes all it takes is one person kind enough to notice before it disappears.